I still remember the exact moment the room changed. It was not loud. No one gasped. No one laughed. A name traveled quietly from one desk to another, barely above a whisper, yet it carried weight. The kind of weight that makes people sit up straighter without realizing it. Someone leaned forward. Someone else froze with a pencil mid-air. On the paper in front of us was a face everyone recognized, but no one felt ready to confront. This was not admiration anymore. This was pressure, the kind that does not announce itself but settles into the chest and stays there. In that instant, it became clear that this was not a test of memory or technique. It was a test of calm, of control, of how steady your hands could remain when perfection was staring straight back at you. The silence grew heavier not because anyone was afraid, but because everyone understood the same unspoken truth at the same time. This was not about who he was in the public eye. This was about what he represented when stripped of lighting, editing, and distance. A standard. And standards do not negotiate. At first, many of us assumed it would be manageable. After all, famous faces are everywhere. We see them on screens, billboards, magazines. Familiarity creates a dangerous confidence. You think you know the face because you have seen it so often. But when the pencil touched the paper, that illusion dissolved almost immediately. There was nowhere to exaggerate, nowhere to simplify, nowhere to hide. Every line carried responsibility. Every curve demanded restraint. You could not lean into style because style would betray accuracy. You could not soften mistakes because even the smallest deviation became obvious. It was then that I understood something many people never realize about beauty at its highest level. It is not forgiving. It does not accommodate approximation. It does not reward effort alone. It demands precision, and it exposes hesitation without mercy. Later, someone asked why such a face would ever be chosen for an examination. The answer was quieter than expected, almost casual. Because perfection leaves no margin. When something is nearly flawless, even a minor error becomes visible. That is why it works as a test. Not because it is complex, but because it is exact. Faces with irregularity allow interpretation. They accept adjustment. But a face built on balance and proportion resists reinterpretation. You either meet it where it stands, or you fall short. There is no middle ground. That is why students panic, not out of fear, but out of respect for how little room they have to move. What made this moment linger long after the exam was not the difficulty itself, but the realization that this principle extends far beyond paper and pencil. When people speak about Wang Yibo, they often focus on visibility, influence, popularity. Those are surface conversations. The deeper truth is more uncomfortable and more compelling. Standards cannot be mass-produced. They cannot be rushed. They cannot be assembled from borrowed pieces. The industry has tried, many times, to replicate what seems successful. Similar silhouettes appear, familiar expressions return, echoes of the same cool restraint surface again and again. Yet something is always missing, not because the attempts lack effort, but because they misunderstand the source. What people struggle to copy is not the face itself, but the discipline behind it, the consistency, the years of maintaining balance under scrutiny, the ability to remain composed without appearing distant, present without appearing loud. These qualities are not cosmetic. They cannot be applied after the fact. They are built slowly, reinforced through repetition, and tested under pressure. That is why, when stripped of styling and enhancement, the structure remains intact. The face does not collapse without embellishment. It holds. that stability tells a story many overlook. It speaks of routine, of restraint, of understanding when not to do more. During breaks, some students compared sketches. The differences were revealing. It was not about who drew better lines. It was about who understood when to stop. Overworking ruined more drawings than lack of effort ever did. The most convincing attempts were often the quietest ones. No drama, no excess shading, no unnecessary emphasis. Just balance. That lesson stayed with many of us far longer than the exam score. Because balance is not just an artistic principle, it is a way of existing in public without being consumed by it. This is why discussions about replication always miss the point. You can mimic appearance, but you cannot replicate accumulation. Time leaves traces that cannot be designed. Experience settles into posture, into gaze, into how someone occupies silence. These things are not taught quickly. They emerge through sustained pressure and conscious control. That is why some figures become reference points rather than trends. They do not dominate through volume. They define through stability. And stability, once established, becomes unmistakable. There is also something quietly reassuring about witnessing this kind of standard. In a fast-moving landscape where attention shifts daily, it reminds people that some forms of excellence still take time, that some things cannot be accelerated, that recognition earned through consistency carries a different weight from recognition gained through novelty. This does not create distance between the figure and the audience. It creates trust. People may not always articulate it, but they feel it. They sense when something is constructed and when something is sustained. By the time the exam ended, the tension had softened, not because it had been easy, but because clarity had replaced uncertainty. Everyone knew exactly where they stood. That is the quiet power of a true standard. It does not confuse, it reveals. And once you have measured yourself against it, you carry that awareness forward. It shapes how you approach the next challenge, how you define improvement, how you understand restraint. Stories like this rarely go viral because they are loud. They travel because they resonate. They reflect an experience many people recognize in different forms. A moment when something familiar suddenly becomes demanding, when admiration turns into respect, when simplicity reveals its depth. That is why this story continues to circulate, not as praise, but as reflection. It is not asking people to agree, it is inviting them to observe. If you have stayed with this story until now, thank you for giving your time and attention. On Star Watch Now, we focus on moments like these, where the surface narrative fades and something more meaningful quietly comes into view. If you appreciate stories that look beyond headlines and explore what truly shapes influence and longevity, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing grounded, thoughtful perspectives in a space that often moves too fast to pause. Thank you for listening, and we hope you will stay with us for the next story and the one after that.